So congratulations on the Philly Kid.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
I guess first things first, what actually attracted you to the project?
Well, I worked with the people that were making it before. We did a film called 51, which was sci-fi, and I loved working down in Louisiana. And then they came to me and they had this script, which is, by the way, not how it always is. Very often, one finds a script, develops it, then goes out looking for the money. So it's quite nice in this case because I got to, they had the financing, and then they came and said that they'd like me to direct it, and I just, it was based on a real story. We moved some stuff around. Obviously, it was dramatized somewhat, but and I just, it was a new genre for me, which is, about to direct a period romantic comedy called Of Course It's Mine, which is another genre as well. So I love the idea of moving around in sort of genres. So, and I also like MMA fighting. I know a few people who fight, and have watched some fights, and I just thought the story was kind of interesting, and also it was great to work for Joel Silver. That's not a bad thing to have on your resume too. So all of those things really, worked in favor of doing it.
Yeah, I was going to mention actually that your previous the previous films that you've directed have been more sci-fi and horror orientated. So the Philly Kid definitely marks new territory for you as a filmmaker. And also
Yes,
After Dark Films, they've been best known for their horror output and
yes,
their Five Films to Die For series. But the Philly Kid is part of their first slate of After Dark action.
that's
It's
right. Yeah.
so as well as you and the company basically taking on these going into new territory.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing that's kind of, it's a double-edged sword with After Dark because you get a very limited period of time to shoot. We shot this film in 18 days, and but in saying that, it also teaches you very much to be fully prepared, and really do your work in the pre-production so that you can hit the ground running in the shoot period. And I feel like in Of Course It's Mine, I'm going to get 25 days. So I mean, it's going to feel like I've got all the time in the world. Not really, but it's a good schooling, I think, because having acted for a long time, I do feel like there's a certain energy that comes on a movie set when things are moving at a reasonable pace, and you get these very big bloated. Uh, and certainly, I'm not saying I wouldn't like to have more money to shoot films, but you get sort of bloated films and budgeted films, and everything slows to the point where it just sort of, you're shooting about 30 seconds of usable film a day, or and I really like the energy that happens when you get a decent budget, but you've got to work within the parameters of that and also time.
Yeah.
Um, but so Philly Kid was, as I say, it was uh, it was pretty full on, and what was wonderful was that all the actors came very prepared. I mean, Wes, who plays the lead in the movie, that's him all the way through in all the fights. It's never a double. He fights all of the fights, and you know, in fact, he really went at it. And the guys he was fighting were real MMA fighters. So, ostensibly we were almost shooting probably about 80% of him was actually really fighting, and 20% was making sure that they weren't, killing each other.
Obviously, mixed martial arts and the UFC, especially, of course, is big business. And since the MMA boom a few years ago, we've seen a spate of films based around the sport. Kind of like the kickboxing movies in the 90s were a big thing.
Yeah,
But one of the things
yeah,
that immediately stuck out to me about the Philly Kid, in comparison to all the other films of its kind, was the cast. I mean, you've got as you said, you've got Wes, Neil McDonough, Devon as well, and even Michael J. White is in there. I mean, it's a really strong, experienced cast, and I think that shows in the film.
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing about having been in the business as an actor is that there are a couple of things. I mean, some of the actors in it had heard of me or knew about me, and also when I get in the room with them, I talk to them from the point, without hopefully sounding too wanky, from the point of being an actor, having been an actor, and therefore I speak the same language, and I want them to bring everything that they can to it, and I think that usually on set that's very much apparent, and then they become very secure in the idea of bringing stuff. And Neil McDonough is he's just I mean when you have a shoot like this, you don't get 20 takes. You get three, maybe sometimes four, but that's about it. And on occasion when you're running around, you really are sort of, you know, putting the camera down, getting the lights set up, and really moving it through. Because in my world, I believe that when you're telling a story, coverage is king. If you've got coverage, you hopefully never have to cut to a shot that you hate or that doesn't work because you've got it covered from. And I often in almost every scene we use two cameras, quite often with a tight lens and a slightly looser lens. And in that film particularly, I was trying to do as little handheld as possible. If you notice, I wanted to make it very glidey and quite stylized, hopefully give it a bigger look than the actual budget.
Yeah,
And so, and then also with the contrasting with the light and things, but and saturating the colors. But I remember one thing very. I mean, all of them were great, and as I say, Wes threw himself into the part, quite literally. But Neil, there was a scene where Wes and he are walking away from the gym, and they're talking to each other, and the light was going, and it was badly scheduled because it was the last shot of the day, and it was a big dialogue scene, and it was like 4 pages, and I needed him to stop at a certain point, which was literally 120 yards down on gravel, and we were steady camming with two cameras following him, and the sound crew and everything booming him, and he hit that mark 4 times in a row, exactly on the same line. And I mean, it was just like without him doing that kind of stuff, suddenly you fall behind. You don't get the coverage. You don't get your days. So to have those guys, all of them, was just one a joy, but also just as far as getting coverage and everything in the film was a huge bonus.
as you said, your acting career as well. I mean, I'm always hearing from actors who say that working with directors who either have acted or are still acting, makes them a lot easier to work with. I mean, it gives them another dimension, and I guess it allows them to to understand the actors better.
Yes, I mean, I do. Look, there are many people who come through commercials and they have a wonderful aesthetic with their eye, and I probably don't have anything like that aesthetic ability. But I do know that having worked, in commercials with inanimate objects, sometimes those directors find it hard to talk to actors because they feel either intimidated or because they're not quite sure how to express. Whereas on my side, I feel, as I say, with having had that kind of experience and acted myself and things, I do know that the atmosphere on the set, universally on all the films that I've made, has been one that's sort of creative one and hopefully a good communicative one.
And you've also got some fresher faces in there as well, like Sarah Butler and also Chris Van Varenberg at the beginning.
Yeah, well, he was actually at After Dark because his father was doing Universal Soldier,
Oh
and
yeah.
also I think he was doing a part in a film called Dragon Eye,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and Chris was there, and I said to him, "Hey, I've got this part at the beginning of the film. He's a very, very sweet boy, and to tell you the truth, I feel for him because I know being a young act, being a young actor, what that's like to have a famous father and feel as though you want to make your mark. And
Yeah.
so I said to him, you should come and audition. So he came in, he did his stuff, and I was like, uh, I'd love to use you, and he was very happy and came in, did his stuff, and was very professional. And you know, and Sarah, Sarah, it was funny. Sarah was doing another job. I love her look, and she's very, very nice girl, and I don't know. I just thought she was right, and I actually auditioned her over Skype, which was pretty surreal, because it was just a bit bizarre, but she was great, and you know, I wanted to make her character a little more proactive. So we did the whole stuff with the bottle and her kneeing the guy at the end, so that you could see that they were more of a team as opposed to her just sort of being someone who was another appendage to him.
And as you mentioned that in the actual the cage fighting scenes, the shots they're very smooth and like you said, stylized. Definitely some of the best shot I've ever seen. But how did you, what you
Oh,
know
thank you.
what were the challenges of shooting those particular scenes to ensure that each one stood out from the last? Because there's certainly no shortage of those scenes in the film.
Yes. Well, there was a few things. I mean, first of all, I wanted to make it very specific that each fight had its own meaning, so that it wasn't just two people beating the snot out of each other. The first fight is about him losing control and sort of frightening himself by the fact that this sort of animal comes out. The second fight was about how he sort of didn't want to go there, where he was just going to use the means that he had to knock someone out, but he didn't really want to go to the scary place again. The third fight was about the fact that he'd been drugged, obviously, and that ultimately he would do anything to win the fight, and in fact did. And the fourth one was about sort of beating the guy and able to control the animal inside, and therefore didn't ever have to really do it again. And what it was a bit of a hairy moment, because I was sitting with the executives at Warner's, and they showed me. Oh, actually, I probably shouldn't give the name of the film, but it's not that I thought there were some beautiful shots in that film as far as the fighting was concerned, but I wanted the fights to have a very real quality to them, and
Yeah.
to be, somewhat down and dirty, and I wanted them to be very intimate, not shot from miles away, to show the sort of, once you've established the territory of where they are in the cage, I wanted to come in and really, hopefully, viscerally feel as though you're in there in the sort of dugout with them, or in the trenches or whatever. Um, and so I didn't really want to shoot them as they were shot in kind of mid-shot and stuff, and slow-mo, a lot of slow-mo and everything. I want to be quite judicious about that kind of shot. And so we shot from outside the ring on tracks. We shot closer from outside, then inside, then steady cam inside, and then I shot also some 7D stuff, um, one from above the ring, just fixed there underneath. And then also I built what's called a punch cam, where I took the 7D and put a cage around it, and then had the fighter punch the camera.
Oh right.
And all of those things hopefully kind of um, gave a specific look that I was going for, which was hopefully quite sort of real and realistic. There was a couple of slow mos, especially the big punch at the end, and also a couple of jump shots. But on the whole, it was shot in a realistic way.
Yeah, I like the fact that each fight kind of tells its own story in a way, as you mentioned, and
Yeah,
it does make them feel different from the last, as opposed to many other films. They just feel like another fight.
exactly. And it's it's I think it's always more interesting to watch if you're invested in what's actually happening as opposed to just the aesthetics of two people bashing each other. I mean, actually, if you watch MMA fights, the commentators are very often setting you up to understand the people who are fighting. And of course, they do that whole thing at the beginning of saying, "Well, he's done this and he's done that, and he
Yeah,
lived here and he's married to this person." But then when they're in the cage, they'll be giving you snippets which will make you oh, in his last fight, this happened to him, and so he's going to be fighting for that not to happen this time, and he's known as a grappler, but he wants to challenge this guy standing up because this guy said that he could beat him up without having to go on the ground. All this kind of stuff, which all gives you the groundwork for watching the fight with a perspective as opposed to just watching the fight.
yeah. And another thing I like is that, I guess you take, Warrior for example, which is, Hollywood put, stepping their foot in the MMA movie game, I guess you could call it. But so many of these, lower budget films, they, the stories are quite contained and personal, but they always seem to be trying to, stage these fights, almost kind of at a UFC level. And if you understand, I mean, like in the Philly Kid, the fighting takes place, with the exception to the last fight, all takes place in a club, and it's much more
Yeah.
run down and dirty as opposed to, something like the UFC, which I find often these other films, try and emulate, which just doesn't really, fit for the story.
Yeah, I mean that's exact fit for the story is exactly you sort of hit the nail on the head. There are a number of things. I mean, the budget that is written on IMDb for this movie is considerably more than we actually had. I'm not quite sure why that happened, but it seems to have quite a lot on IMDb. And I always feel like there comes a point where you can't tell a story. It happened on Area 51 where there was a mattress factory, and it was a disused mattress factory, and we made it into Area 51 because it was a huge warehouse-looking building, and at the back it had block buildings and things, and we painted them, we put signage up, there was grass, we made it look as though it was the entrance to Hangar 18, and I said, but I need military vehicles, I've got military vehicles, but I need like two Hummers, a deuce and a half or whatever. And the producer said, having said yes, right near when we were going to shoot it, said no. So I basically said, look, this is the point. This is the point where we can no longer tell the story. If I don't have military vehicles, then suddenly the story doesn't have credibility.
Yeah,
And it was the same thing in the Philly Kid. I'm not going to tell you how many extras I had, but believe me, very few. And so I made sure that the camera was whenever it was either pointing down or it was pointing, or the guy with the steady cam had it swung upside down so that you weren't as aware of the crowd. And also, when the lights came up and stuff, I filled in bits, just things that kept you away from hopefully from realizing that there weren't as many people as I would have liked. Um, um, and it's the same thing. I said, look, we can't have a big club, where we're trying to sell the idea that this is, a bigger movie. I can make the movie look bigger by steady camming and smooth gliding and dolly work and all this kind of thing. So it doesn't have that like the wrestler or the fighter, which is all handheld sort of wobbly cam. I want to stay away from that. Um, but I don't want to try and make it bigger than it really is because that's where you show the story that you can't tell. And I want to
yeah.
show the story that I can tell. So, let's keep it intimate in that way. This is Bayou fights. So, you know, there's not thousands of people there. And believe me, you know, when I didn't watch The Warrior on purpose until after I'd finished my film, but when I saw it, I was like, wow, some of the arena stuff they had was just huge.
No, absolutely. I mean, I was talking to Luke Goss actually a few months ago, and about that. These kind of contained stories, and obviously, it's always good to to have a lot of money when you're making films, but there comes a point where these stories they simply don't they don't need all this. I mean you don't when the stories are personal and they're centered around just a few characters. Like you said, you don't want to make it feel bigger than it is, because it will just it just takes you out of the story and it doesn't.
Well, honestly, I truly believe that all stories are character driven. You take a film like Die Hard. It's a massive story. There's big explosions. There's lots of special effects and all of that. But the bottom line is, and you were invested in Bruce Willis because right from the outset, as soon as you open the film with him on the plane, and he's talking to his wife, and they've obviously got a problem, and she's joined the corporate world, and he's having problems in Chicago, and he's coming to see her, but he's very tentative and he's nervous, and he obviously finds the corporate world intimidating, and also he finds it hard to be a regular cop because he's always getting into trouble for using his own initiative, and all of these things you invest in the story because you know those things about him, and then he finds himself in the position he finds himself in, and I truly believe it doesn't matter how big the story gets. I mean, Die Hard without the explosions is still a really interesting story about a guy who finds himself in an extraordinary situation.
Yeah,
I think that as you say, very often, or certainly often, um, you know, films can get overblown, and it doesn't help the story at all. In fact, it detracts from the story completely, and you begin to feel like you're not really seeing the person. You're seeing, this huge array of stuff, and you start to sort of lose interest. I find anyway.
yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks very much, Jason.
No, Adam, really good to talk to you, and I really appreciate your comments about the film. It's when one works hard, and then people just have a one word, it was good, or oh, it was shit. It's nice to hear from someone who has obviously watched the film, and I appreciate all your comments.
No problem. It's a pleasure to speak to you.